They told him it was free health care. They didn't tell him they were watching him die on purpose. When we think of science, we think of progress, cures, hope. But sometimes, in the name of discovery, something darker happens. These aren't accidents. These are moments when brilliant minds made calculated decisions that destroyed lives. This is when science went horribly wrong in America. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment. For 40 years, the U.S. government ran a study where the treatment was doing nothing at all. In 1932, the Public Health Service recruited 600 black men in Alabama. 399 had syphilis. The doctors told them they were receiving free treatment for bad blood. They weren't. What scientists thought would happen. They wanted to document the full progression of untreated syphilis from infection to death. Natural history, they called it. Complete medical records. What actually went wrong? Even after penicillin became the standard cure in 1947, researchers actively prevented these men from getting treatment. They watched them go blind, watched their organs fail, watched them infect their wives, watched their children born with congenital syphilis. The human cost: 128 men died from syphilis or related complications. 40 wives were infected. 19 children were born with the disease. By the time the study ended in 1972, only 74 men were still alive. Why it was allowed to happen? Racism made it easy to justify. Poverty made the men vulnerable. And the belief that scientific knowledge mattered more than individual lives gave doctors permission to keep watching them suffer for 4 decades. No one was ever criminally charged. Mkultra, the CIA's mind control program. Hook. The CIA dosed thousands of Americans with LSD without their knowledge or consent, and most of them never knew why their lives fell apart. In 1953, the CIA launched mkultra, a top-secret program to develop mind control techniques. The Cold War was heating up, and the agency was terrified the Soviets were ahead in psychological warfare. What scientists thought would happen? They'd unlock the secrets of the human mind, find ways to extract information, erase memories, create sleeper agents. Science fiction made real. What actually went wrong? CIA operatives and contractors administered LSD and other drugs to unwitting subjects, mental patients, prisoners, sex workers, random bar patrons. One scientist, Frank Olson, was secretly dosed by his colleagues. 9 days later, he plunged from a hotel window to his death. The CIA called it suicide. His family called it murder. The human cost: thousands were experimented on. Many suffered permanent psychological damage. Careers destroyed. Marriages ended. Some were driven to suicide. The program used hospitals, universities, and prisons as testing grounds. Most victims never knew they were part of an experiment. Why it was allowed to happen? National security erased ethical boundaries. The program operated in complete secrecy, with virtually no oversight. When it finally came to light in 1975, the CIA had already destroyed most of the records. We still don't know the full extent of what they did. The Demon Core. 2 scientists played with the same piece of plutonium. Both died screaming. After World War II, Los Alamos scientists continued nuclear weapons research. At the center of their work was a 14-pound sphere of plutonium called the Demon Core, originally destined for a 3rd atomic bomb. What scientists thought would happen? They'd carefully measure how close they could bring neutron reflectors to the core before triggering a critical reaction. Controlled experiments, precise measurements. What actually went wrong? Physicist Harry Daghlian accidentally dropped a tungsten carbide brick onto the core. Blue light flooded the room. He'd triggered a critical reaction. 9 months later, Physicist Louis Slotin was demonstrating the experiment using two half-spheres around the core. His screwdriver slipped. The spheres closed. The same blue flash filled the room. The human cost. Daghlian died 25 days after his accident, in excruciating pain as his body destroyed itself from radiation. Slotin died in 9 days. His colleague, who stood closest to him during the accident, died years later from complications. 6 others in the room suffered radiation exposure. Why it was allowed to happen. Post-war confidence bred carelessness. Scientists called these demonstrations tickling the dragon's tail. They knew the risks. They did it anyway. After Slotin's death, hands-on critical assembly experiments were finally banned. The demon core was melted down and recycled into other weapons. Atomic soldiers. The military told them to watch the bomb go off. Then it told them to march toward the mushroom cloud. Between 1945 and 1962, the U.S. conducted over 200 atmospheric nuclear tests. But the military had a problem. They needed to know if soldiers could fight on a nuclear battlefield. What scientists thought would happen. They'd gather data on troop performance near nuclear detonations. Radiation exposure would be monitored and kept within acceptable limits. The information would be invaluable for future warfare. What actually went wrong? Over 400,000 servicemen were deliberately exposed to nuclear blasts. They were positioned as close as 2 miles from ground zero. After detonation, soldiers were ordered to march through fallout zones, dig trenches in contaminated soil, and handle radioactive materials. Many received no protective equipment. Radiation badges, when provided, were often collected and destroyed to hide exposure levels. The human cost. Cancer rates among atomic veterans skyrocketed. Leukemia, thyroid cancer, bone cancer. Thousands died. Their children were born with birth defects. For decades, the government denied any connection. Veterans died, waiting for recognition and compensation. Why it was allowed to happen. Cold War paranoia demanded sacrifice. Soldiers were seen as expendable test subjects. The Pentagon classified the health risks and suppressed internal studies showing the danger. It wasn't until 1988 that Congress finally acknowledged the harm and established a compensation program. By then, tens of thousands were already dead. The Willowbrook hepatitis study. Doctors deliberately infected children with hepatitis, and the parents signed permission forms they didn't understand. Willowbrook State School in Staten Island was an institution for children with intellectual disabilities. By the 1950s, it was overcrowded, understaffed, and hepatitis was spreading through the facility like wildfire. What scientists thought would happen. Researcher Saul Krugman proposed an elegant solution. Since most children would get hepatitis anyway, why not infect them in a controlled setting? They'd study the disease progression and test potential vaccines. Parents of new admissions were told their children could only be admitted if they joined the special hepatitis unit. What actually went wrong? For 15 years, researchers fed live hepatitis virus to children, some as young as 3 years old. They extracted it from the feces of infected children and fed it to healthy ones. Parents were told it was a vaccine trial. It wasn't. It was intentional infection, the human cost. Hundreds of children were deliberately infected with a potentially deadly disease. Many suffered liver damage. Some died. The psychological trauma of being used as test subjects in an institution that was supposed to care for them is immeasurable. Why it was allowed to happen. These children were seen as less than human, institutionalized, vulnerable. Their parents, desperate for any placement, were coerced with promises of faster admission. The researchers published their findings in prestigious journals. Their colleagues celebrated their work. It wasn't until the 1970s that public outrage finally shut the study down. Science isn't good or evil. It's a tool. But in the wrong hands, or with the wrong justification, it becomes something else entirely. Every one of these experiments was approved, funded, documented, published. The scariest part isn't that these things happened. It's how long they were allowed to continue. How many people knew and said nothing? How easy it was to convince brilliant minds that the end justified the means. We like to think we've learned, that we have safeguards now, ethics boards, informed consent, oversight. But history doesn't repeat itself because we forget the lessons. It repeats because we convince ourselves we're different, that our reasons are better, that this time the sacrifice will be worth it. The question isn't whether science will go wrong again. It's whether we'll recognize it while there's still time to stop it.